One is about, we all know that India is the biggest consumer of gold in the world. Why not we can think of introducing voluntary disclosure of gold, which I hope will help us to develop our infrastructure. My second question is about, we all hear and read a lot about the black money that it is there in the outside the country. Everybody says if we bring back the money, we need not tax the people and India can become a very richest nation. So what is the fact? Thank you.
Dr. Janaki Raman, Government Arts College professor, economics professor. Even after 23 years of economic reform, the growth poverty debate continues thanks to the recent spat between the Sen and Bhagavati, and thanks to the Uncertain Glory books released by Sen. And shall we get the impression that the trickle-down effect thoroughly failed or produced mixed results, and the entitlement way of approaching the poverty reduction started in India? And we hope that sincerely that after having read your articles that you are a vocal opponent of the giving of subsidies and entitlement in this economy. So what's your view, sir?
And the last question, the first round from the student, with respect to that,
Good evening, sir. I'm Varun Raj from 2nd BTech CSC of Shastra SRC. Sir, I want to ask you two questions and one suggestion, can I say? Firstly, I want to...
Questions,
Questions, okay, sir. Firstly, is there that much need for direct FDIs instead of modifying the FEMAs or FERAs? So we can regulate them or we can modify them. Instead of that, directly by making the FDIs to invest directly, you may say that we can develop and employment may be created. But instead of that, we can say that beyond China we are very much lagged because of somewhat electronic goods production and somewhat. If we concentrate...
Question, quick to the question.
Question is there that much need?
How do you prioritize the FDI?
FDIs instead of encouraging local?
Okay, we'll stop there. So,
I think that's a pretty good collection of on these. First, let me say something about growth, poverty, because it's an important subject, and you have invoked two very famous economists who, Amartya Sen and Jagdish Bhagwati. Now, I have no idea whether the papers exaggerate this or not, but when I know them both, and when you ask them, they're not actually, Amartya I know does not say that growth doesn't matter. He has on a number of occasions quite categorically said that, look, I believe growth is essential and you need the growth if you're going to do all the other good things. What he, I think, says is that the reason I don't talk about it so much is because the government is going on and on about growth anyway. So I know you're worried about that, but I'm concerned that you should worry about health and education. And by the way, he's right on that. So what he's saying is, don't misread me. I'm not saying growth doesn't matter. I recognize it matters. I know that you fellows are talking about it. I have my doubts whether you're taking health and education as seriously as you should, therefore I'm focusing on that. Now, when you talk to Bhagwati, I mean, he says that growth of course is important, but he says, I have always been in favor of health and education. So whatever the debate between the two, I think the public should not feel that one is somehow against the other. Economists like debating, so it's good actually. I mean, if I were to want to hear, around the world you'll find that very distinguished economists can be aligned on one side and against them you can get others. But the central question that you ask, if you're worried as a citizen, the government of India's view quite clearly is that number one, we are not just talking about growth, we are talking about inclusive growth. In other words, it's a growth that must reach everybody. Now, I don't know about trickle down, because if you're going to say, if trickle down is meant to be a disparaging kind of remark, that is a little bit trickles down, that's not what we are talking about. We're talking about inclusive growth. Now, you could ask yourself the question, what is inclusive growth? In my view, inclusive growth means two things. First, clearly the growth must be high, If you don't have high growth, you're not going to generate all the revenues that you need in order to fund all the inclusiveness programs. But inclusive growth is not just high growth revenues and programs. Inclusive growth is that the growth itself must be of an inclusive nature, so that the incomes that are generated are not concentrated in small areas or small sectors. I mean, for example, when we say agricultural growth must expand to 4%, we're trying to make sure that the growth is actually inclusive, because it'll be widely spread in rural areas. When we say we want to support medium and small industry, we're trying to say that, look, we're not looking just for a growth concentrated in capital-intensive, high-skill industry. If that happens, that's good. But we're not getting enough of the medium and small industries, which are regionally spread out much more and which also generate more employment. When we say inclusive, we want growth to be regionally balanced. We don't want just a growth which is concentrated in Mumbai and Chennai and Bangalore. We want it to be much more widespread regionally. Now you may ask, are we achieving this? Is the growth that we've had inclusive? Now this has been said by many people, and most recently I think the Prime Minister, in his remarks at the Congress Parliamentary Party, and I refer you to the text of that, which I'm sure you can get on the internet. If you look at poverty reduction, there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the extent and rate of poverty reduction per year in the period after 2004 is 3 times what it was in the previous 10 years. So if you just look at the lens of is it reducing poverty, the high growth that we've been able to get is more poverty reducing than it was earlier, no question about it. Second, is it leading to a growth of real consumption in rural areas? Absolutely. The data that I have seen do show that the growth of real per capita consumption in rural areas is about 4 times faster than it was in the previous period. If you look at rural wages in real terms, the growth rate in the post-2004 period is 6 times faster than it was in the previous period. Now, I think that's because, first of all, we've had a lot more agricultural growth, not as much as we would have liked, but more than we had earlier. And that would generate a lot of demand for labor, tighten the labor market in rural areas. Second, you've had a lot of construction activity, particularly road building, and also in some of the urbanization that's taking place. That's taking rural labor out of agriculture and putting them into non-agricultural practices. Plus, we've got programs like the MGNREGA program, which actually provides people with jobs. Now, when I talk about this in urban areas, many people tell me, I just came from Chennai and everybody was saying that, this program is making people lazy, they don't want to come forward and work, there's a shortage of work, etc. We need to look at all these things. Personally, I think there's nothing wrong with providing an assurance of something like 100 days, that's what it is, at a very minimum wage. And actually, if you look at the data, there's almost no state where people are taking up more than 50 days. So, it is only increasing the bargaining power of labor a little bit, then all these other factors are leading to the rise in real wages. And, if you're bothered about inclusiveness, that's unambiguously a good thing. Now, when you look at other indicators like maternal mortality, infant mortality, education, literacy, in every one of these dimensions, there is more progress in the last 10 years than there was in the previous period. This is consistent with there's more unhappiness also, because I think aspirations have really exploded, which is good. The media, particularly the electronic media, is in a unique position to basically bring to everybody's attention everything that is not going well. It tends not to concentrate so much attention on the things that are going well. And no harm, it puts governments under pressure. But when you're looking at it as a concerned citizen, it's worth asking yourself these hard questions. I think if somebody were to get up and say that, look, I agree with you that poverty is going down faster than it was. I agree with you that we are making more progress, but this progress is not fast enough. I don't have an answer to that question. I can only say, let's try to do even better. But you should not, I think, be misled by people who say there's no progress, things are getting worse. I mean, that's just not true. So that's my response on this rather important question. You know, on gold and infrastructure, see, it's true that people have a huge amount of gold. A lot of people say, well, why don't you mobilize this gold? In the sense, offer gold bonds. But you know, if you want to offer gold bonds and you don't want to take the risk, then basically you would realize you would either just keep the bonds, the gold at home, or if you were going to sort of spend money, create money, and use the gold in order to finance the additional expenditure, you'd be left with an asset liability mismatch. That is, you owe a lot of people gold and you use up the gold. And I don't know who wants to do that. So frankly, I think the only solution on the gold front is you should create an environment in which people do not find gold a worthwhile investment. Now frankly, if we could do that, people suddenly decided that, look, inflation is about 5% or 6%. It isn't at the moment, but I think we could get there. And the rate of return on financial assets is about whatever it is, 10, maybe higher. And gold will only be at the same rate as inflation. And then people will get rid of extra gold and put the money into financial assets. And I think we should concentrate on that, not invent ways of somehow mobilizing. I think we can ask the chairman and the board of City Union Bank. I don't think that you can take on a gold, you can't use the gold and take on a gold liability and not cover it. And if you cover it, it doesn't do anything, because whatever money you gain by selling the gold, you have to use to import the gold to keep as a cover. So I think that's my answer. On black money, if we can do something to grab it, we should. If we can find someone who's demonstrably had black money, we should punish them. But in my view, other than saying that, there are no quick answers. I'm not very convinced, by the way, that it's such a good idea to say, well, we now legalize black money. That is sending really the wrong signal. However, this is not something that the Planning Commission has taken a view on. I know that government every now and then has done something, but the honest truth is most of what we call, these bonds to attract black money don't actually work, for the simple reason that nobody is willing to get up and say, by the way, here's a basket full of black money, can you give me an immune bond? Because the moment he says that, the tax authorities immediately know this fellow must be having a lot more money. So only somebody who is about to pop off might think, well, what the hell, I'm going anyway, I'll declare all of my money and that's fine. I think most of these black money schemes are less well thought out. And certainly by giving these exemptions, you're undermining the argument that we should be punishing people who have it. So I'm not that convinced that there's much there. On the issue of GST, I'm not sure why you think GST is not ethical. In my view, the GST is simply a recognition, at the moment, what is the global best practice for an indirect tax? Rule number one of a global best practice is there should be no cascading. We shouldn't be having a situation where I'm paying tax on inputs, tax on output, etc. Everything should be netted out. Now, to do that netting out, it has to be a continuous chain all the way up. In our case,